Everywhere you look, cannabis enthusiasts, patients, and consumers are turning away from pesticides. Most pesticides approved for growing food are not approved for use with cannabis, and yet there they are in the market all the time. These food crop pesticides may be tested as safe enough in very low doses when watered down and outside in the rain on food products, but most have never been tested to be burned and inhaled into the lungs like cannabis often is, and even more so when concentrated like cannabis oil for dabbing. Pesticides run the range of risk from untested for safety when growing cannabis all the way to specifically toxic when used in cannabis. And the crazy thing is that some people and even companies still use them. Many growers have grown accustomed to relying on chemical pesticides when they get spider mites or russet mite or any one of the nasty bugs that attack cannabis crops. Nearly nobody wants to use the sketchy pesticides, but some growers just don't have the experience to rely solely on holistic horticulture practices. And that's too bad too, because people have been growing without chemical pesticides for decades. It's just that cannabis happens to be in a pocket of modern agriculture that has been late to adopt. The damn thing is that many states are not even testing regulated cannabis for pesticides. They do it on an honor system, and that sure has not worked out well so far. When the state does not test for pesticides, it pretty much makes a mockery of the legal system's claim to provide a superior product to the black market. In the legal market right now, you still have to know your grower, and that's the same thing as unregulated medical was. Cannabis consumers are beginning to get educated, though, about pesticides and pesticide regulation and are starting to demand cannabis grown without pesticides and using other sustainable growing methods like using living soil. Cannabis growers with vision, though, have seen this coming for a long time, and many growers are already migrating away from pesticides and are leading the industry with really clean cannabis products that consumers flock to. Today, we're going to talk about working with nature instead of against it. We're going to talk about using beneficial insects as allies to eat the bugs that are pests. And there really is a difference. Some bugs will defend your garden instead of destroy it. And this is a well-established agricultural practice. It's not new. It's just new to cannabis, like so many other things now that cannabis is being normalized. Today, we're going to encourage you to use bugs and not drugs to defend your cannabis garden. If you enjoy hearing frank discussions that dive deep into cannabis health, business, and technique, I encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter. Every week, you'll receive a new podcast episode delivered right to your inbox, along with commentary on a couple of the most important news items from the week and videos too. Don't rely on social media to let you know when a new episode is published. Sign up for the updates to make sure you don't miss an episode. You are listening to Shaping Fire, and I'm your host, Shango Los. My guest today is Shane Young. Shane founded Natural Enemies in 2014 to focus on encouraging the use of beneficial insects in commercial cannabis. Prior to that, Shane managed acres and acres and acres of ornamental greenhouses for a Greenhouse Growers Magazine Top 25 horticulture company. After personally designing, transitioning, and running the company's successful beneficial insects program, he chose to switch gears and bring his expertise to the cannabis industry to help producers reduce residual pesticides in medical cannabis. Welcome to the show, Shane.
Hey, Shango. Thanks for having me on, man. It's nice to connect again.
Yeah, totally. It's great to have you back on. So, for most growers familiar with using insects at all, they're used to using ladybugs and praying mantis to fight pests in their garden. What are the advantages to cannabis growers to move beyond using these traditional bugs and using a wider range of beneficial insects like the commercial ornamental horticulture industry does?
Yeah, no, good question. And when you talk about praying mantis and ladybugs, those are kind of generalists per se that, they'll feed on many different things that may be in your garden. They may not be as aggressive as some of the species that we carry, though. What we do at this stage is there's very specific predatory mites that are actually used for, the pest concerns that people have in their operations. The biggest thing that we go into is, we start from the bottom, fungus gnat issues, root aphids in cannabis, and then it goes into broad mite and russet mites are completely, tearing companies apart because of how difficult it is to figure out what you have because the magnification is so small to see these pests in. And then you still have the common ones, two-spot spider mite, thrips, a lot of different things. So the species that we carry carry a very specific, and I guess they're kind of cultured specifically for one job in mind, and that's what the pests are that people have.
Right on. Why wouldn't I want a more generalized insect to be working for me instead of a specialist, so that it just, I can use one insect and it gets rid of all my bugs? Or is that just unrealistic?
No, it's a good question, and it makes sense. There's nothing wrong with having a generalist out there. It's helpful in a lot of different situations, I guess you'd say. But when you have a specialist, they have one main job, and that's to get rid of the pests that you're most concerned with. You know what I mean? I mean, if you have a ladybug and praying mantis, they're not going to do a whole lot for the microscopic mites that you're after. So you want to use specific species that are geared towards your specific pest. Eradication comes about. They clean things up a lot quicker, basically, rather than just a generalist that's roaming around eating, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, I know that you just mentioned a few of the pests that you deal with, but I want to get a better picture of what kind of pests beneficial insects can be used against. So, like every grower pretty much has got their arch enemy, right? The thing that they've been trying to get rid of on and off for, some time. Can you give me an idea? Just name off some of the most common pests that you are working with, so people get an idea of, oh, all right, the one that I'm concerned about is on the list.
Yeah, no, it's good, and it's been fairly simple to compile this list of what people's concerns are. Coming from traditional ag, it was very common pests in agriculture, versus when I come into cannabis, it seems like one of the most common pests that we encounter, again, are from the rooting system, fungus gnats. And the biggest thing about those is that the larval stages of those will feed on your rooting system of your plants, which, I believe is one of the most important part of your plants. I mean, obviously the flower on the back end is great, but, you have to have healthy plants moving into, from mother to veg into your flower room. So plant health is number one. And fungus gnats, I don't think anybody should take lightly. I mean, they spread diseases, they carry other pests with them, and they can spread to a room and, and can become a real issue if you don't take care of it. The biggest thing about that is what I learned is the amount of watering, that the cannabis plant demands. It amazed me because I had never cultured, cannabis. I'd never grown it myself, and I just recall working with one of the 502 growers in Washington where I gave them soil mites to take care of their fungus gnat issues. And 2 weeks later, he called me back and told me I was full of shit, basically. And I'm like, the only reason I know these don't work is, they could freeze, or if they could drown out, basically. So he's like, dude, do you know how much water we're feeding our plants at this point? And, when he told me a gallon of water for a 3-gallon bucket every 2 days, possibly, my first thought was that we were pushing out reproduction, basically. So we ran some trials. We did additional applications to be effective with these things. Fungus gnats, but, what's tearing people apart is root aphids as well. Those are huge pests that people have problems with. And I'm always honest with everybody. They got to be one of the most difficult to get rid of, to eradicate. Generally, when we work with people, we talk about sanitation first. We talk about scoping their soil that they're bringing in, basically, because eggs can be in that soil. So rather than trying to cure them of a situation with our product, we try to get to the root of it on, what steps need to be taken first before we start using our product moving forward. And then it comes to rates at that stage to be effective. So fungus gnats, root aphids in the soil is very common on what we deal with. Moving forward from there, like I had mentioned earlier, two-spot spider mite has to be one of the most common pests, whether it's in cannabis or...
It's like the poster boy of bugs in cannabis.
It's fairly common. I mean, everybody should know what a two-spot spider mite looks like. It's been around. It's very visible by the eye. It's easy to tell what it is. So pest identification is simple, but yeah, it's been around a long time. And from there, thrips are very common as well in agricultural crops, regardless of if it's cannabis or not. But a couple of the most difficult as well has been broad mites and the hemp russet mite as well. I spoke about two-spot spider mites. You can easily identify them because you can see them with your eye. Depends on how old you are, Shango. But, for the most part, you're going to need a scope. You're going to need a high-powered scope to take a look at these things. From what we've gathered, 60-plus magnification is what's needed. And, my old position as a plant health manager, I had the luxury of being 20 minutes away from Oregon State University, had a research facility next to us, an extension service. And we were able to touch base on, what they use in research for out in the field and, in in their offices when they have things. So that's where I started about 10 years ago, is using specific scopes and able to have pest identification. And what's actually coming up more that I really didn't focus very much on is foliar aphids as well. It's probably been about, in the last 3.5 years, 1% of one of the pests that we deal with. But, this last year, it seems to be like there was a string of growers that continually ran into it. And I don't know if that is because of our reach at this point as a company on how many people that we work with, where we are receiving more calls about it. But it just seems like it's a growing pest concern with people as well.
Right on. My experience supports what you're saying about the once you've got roof aphids or some kind of infestation in the substrate, that things can go to hell pretty quickly. In my experience, once they're in the roots, the whole plant starts to get a little sick and lackadaisical, which creates an opportunity for secondary pests. So maybe we could consider the root pest to be like the gateway pest, which breaks down the Trojan horse through the door. And then these secondary pests come. Do you find that happening at the commercial level as well?
Oh yeah, no, you hit it right on the head, man. I mean, like I spoke about previous, a healthy plant, sanitation from the very beginning. These are the key steps. There's not one thing that you do in pest management that's going to take care of all your problems. It's a whole slew of things that go into it. Sanitation, general plant health. If you have a problem in your rooting system and you have a weak plant, basically it's opening itself up to other issues concerning, secondary. Could be disease, it could be additional pests, because it's kind of like you and I. If we're sick, we're not at our best. Basically, there's no way for us to fight off other things except we got to get through it. So at the commercial scale, for sure, man, I think people are still going through, even though I guess recreational use or cultivation has been around for 4 to 5 years, maybe 6. I can't recall when it passed in Colorado, but all these people are still figuring out how to grow at scale. You know what I mean? And I can't imagine it being an easy task at all when you're used to growing 20 plants or 50 or whatever it may be. Now you have to manage a team. You don't just get to be with your plants every single day. You're doing other things as well. Even though you're head of cultivation or you're just IPM management, whatever the company may be, there's so many things that need to be done. We work with people who has 50,000 plants. I mean, I can't imagine even doing that myself. So, yeah, definitely. To answer your question in a roundabout way, plant health is great. And one of the key things in using an integrated approach to pest management with beneficial insects. But yeah, you hit it right on the head.
When you're using beneficial insects to defend your garden, do you use that strategy at all, like some growers do, where you leave a couple sick plants around as sacrificial lambs to attract the pests? Or does that just create an environment for new and secondary and original pests to come into your garden?
Well, the way that I have always been trained is if you have a weak plant, you want to get it out of there. You don't want to contaminate anything else in your room because it could bring it to your plant, but also the surroundings of the plant that's sick, I guess you would say. So just in training of mine has always been cleaning up dead leaves, dead twigs, things like that. If it's a sick plant, get it out of there. Cut your losses sometimes, basically, and just get rid of it. It may make things a lot easier for you moving forward. But for the most part, I would get rid of it, then try to save it. When you talk about sacrificial plants, you can use companion plants or beneficial plants, basically, that can, and this may be outdoors, where it kind of invites beneficial insects or the natural, predatory insects from the outside into your garden outdoors. Indoors, it's a little bit more difficult when people are working in sealed rooms. It kind of doesn't really make sense indoors, but it can be helpful in the pots. It goes back to plant health quite a bit.
Right on. So I think that the elephant in the room, as far as like adoption of beneficial insects, always seems to be growers who have relied so heavily on chemical pesticides for all these years, growing underground during the Prohibition era, indoors, that they've worked out their tech, they know their schedule, and they're like, they depend on it to deliver. And now, because of the huge pushback, both by state regulators and by individual consumers who don't want chemical pesticides sprayed on the plants, suddenly now, a lot of these traditional growers are being pushed to have to consider beneficial insects and give up the bottles that they've wetted for all of these years. What do you say to these growers that are clutching on to their chemical pesticides to help move their heart, if you will, away from using what they've relied on, move them towards what is a more holistic solution and working with nature? How do you get them over the hump of belief?
It's a great question, and it's obviously something that we deal with on a daily basis, and not to defend people who want to use sprays in their garden because things have worked well in the past, but to say something about that, a lot of people, that's been their only option. That's what they know. You know what I mean? That's how people are trained at this point. Being at the company I was at previous to mine, we had a preventative spray program for 28 years that was in place, and my reach or my jump into beneficial insects was the ineffectiveness of sprays. It was worker safety that I was concerned about. It was managing people around sprays and not growing plants anymore. So to kind of answer your question, we don't. I guess I'd say education is first. I'm not here to try to talk somebody into using our product. I try to give them information on the benefits of using our product, and the species that we have and what we can do for you and with you, and how that transitions to, health all around, whether it's your plants or, the consumers who use it on the back end as well. Obviously, past pesticide testing too. So that's a huge thing that is coming up in the industry that's going to be looked at. Well, not coming up, has been around for a while. That's continually looked at on a daily basis. So I always, tell, not just me, but my guys in the office, and I think I might have chosen these words from you in the past in conversation, Shango, that, it's even on our website, it's choose beneficial insects. I tell my guys, we're not here to hard sell people. We're here to educate them first on what can be used for their specific pest concerns, and then moving forward, let's hold their hand. Any questions that people have that come up, whether you've been using biocontrols for 2 years or 10, I still get calls from people that I set up a program 4 years ago that have been a customer for a while that have a question that comes up, so a lot of it is experience. And I think the biggest hurdle, besides the skepticism of it actually being an effective pest management tool, is the way that you kind of have to see to believe type thing, like it actually works for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we'll hit that part even harder, right? Give me an example or two of a big commercial grow that has made the transition, because a lot of folks, they're just afraid of jumping without a parachute, or feeling like if they start making the transition and it doesn't work out, that they're going to lose the whole crop. Like give me a win success story here so people can kind of picture how it works at the commercial level. During the second part of the show, we'll talk more about walking somebody through the transition, but just jump to the end and give me an explanation of a win.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. I mean, and before the show, as we were speaking about a new hire of mine that I have, he was an indoor tier 3 producer in Washington. And I didn't know this until he was actually working in my office. But I recall, I think it was December of last year when I started working with this company. And he said, Shane, what can we do for this? Here's our problems. And I map out controls that usually what I tell people, if it was me, this is how I would approach it, basically. Here's the species to use. Here's what's going to be aggressive. Here's the days to order. Here's how much to order, basically. This is what I think is going to be effective for you. And at that stage, he kind of took it and ran with it, calls me a week later, asks a couple questions, and within 2 months, he had a full transformation of, when I say chemicals, I use that term loosely as just sprays, but they were using OMRI-listed organic sprays, basically. A lot of the times are oil-based, which are, immediate gratification. It dissipates quickly, but within a couple months, we had fully transformed him over. Fast forward into, I just hired him 2 months ago to represent me in Washington State, and he's like, when I called you a year ago, basically, he goes, I had to give my owner a guarantee that your product was going to work. He goes, you never guaranteed that your product doesn't work. You actually told me this isn't a guarantee, man. You know what I mean? This is what I think is going to be helpful. Again, here's what I would use and what we would do, and he ran with it from there. So again, in our previous conversation, it seems like a company needs to have that guy there that is really interested in doing it. If there's an owner that's pushing his head grower to do something else that is out of their comfort level, then sometimes it's really difficult. So I try to lay things out up front towards people on where their roadblocks may come in at, where we might have problems, because I don't just want to make a guarantee. And again, it starts out with education. So I think that's an easy story to tell, as this guy tells me as he works for me. And I was like, yeah, I basically told the owner that I was going to guarantee that this is going to work. And he goes, basically crossing fingers, everything worked out real well, and it's no issues at this point. So, that was a great success story on my end after hearing from him how he kind of went behind my back and made the guarantee on his own to his owner, and not for me, basically.
Yeah, I get that. And there's so many variables to it, and you really do need somebody on the inside who's going to be dedicated to learning a little bit about it and paying attention to it, because it's, while it is a comprehensive solution and works really effectively, it's not like a real simple plug and play. It isn't like a set it and forget it kind of thing. You most solutions for a big garden, you have to massage it. Let's go ahead and take our first short break and be right back. You're listening to Shaping Fire, and my guest today is Shane Young, founder of Natural Enemies Biocontrol. As a listener of Shaping Fire, you already understand the importance of living soil when growing cannabis. When you have active microbe communities in your substrate, you go way beyond simply fertilizing with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Having active microorganisms in your substrate supports vigorous plant growth throughout the plant's root zone, making for higher yields and thriving flowers. Mammoth P is the first organically derived microbial inoculant that focuses on your plant's nutrient cycling processes to release soil phosphorus and other micronutrients from their bound forms, making them more available to the plant. Increased levels of phosphorus will also keep internodes shorter and focus your plant's energy on bud production. Not only that, but the microbes act as a defense shield for the plant's rhizosphere by outcompeting potentially harmful pathogenic microbes. Pretty cool, right? Mammoth P not only unlocks the nutrients in your soil, but it also helps protect your plant from disease. Mammoth P's beneficial bacteria act like microbioreactors, continually producing enzymes that release nutrients. Mammoth P was developed at a U.S. university and has been extensively tested by Colorado growers and independent laboratories. Mammoth P is proven to increase growth and enhance blooming. One of the great things about supplementing with microorganisms is that they won't compete with whatever fertilizer program you're already running. Simply dose on top of your fertilizer schedule for increased benefits. To learn more and to find out where you can buy Mammoth P near you, check out their website at www.mammothmicrobes.com. Partner with microorganisms to create beautiful, thriving cannabis. Mammoth P. If you grow cannabis with sunshine, you can often feel limited by the seasonal cycle. You want to grow sustainably and save money, so you use as little electricity as possible. But if you haven't studied or implemented light deprivation techniques into your greenhouse, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. By incorporating light deprivation solutions into your greenhouse, you can often add 2 or 3 additional growing cycles to your year. When you pencil out the financial benefit of those additional cycles, you'll realize why commercial-scale light deprivation technology is remaking the cannabis industry. What used to be done by pulling tarps over hoop houses has been scaled up over the last few years in such a way that it's become mechanized, easy, and affordable to even small-scale commercial cannabis operations. Forever Flowering Greenhouses is the industry leader in light deprivation, greenhouse design, and operation for the commercial cannabis industry. Their team of greenhouse experts have been in the fields of Northern California for decades, and they're now building greenhouses for commercial cannabis companies across the country. If you are new to light dep and growing in greenhouses, I encourage you to go back to Shaping Fire episode 13 with guest Eric Branstad of Forever Flowering. I talk with Eric about the importance of intelligent greenhouse management as well as the huge financial benefit of incorporating light dep techniques. There are so many aspects of utilizing a greenhouse that can go wrong. From temperature and airflow to light dep and workflow, Forever Flowering will help you produce crop after crop of well cared for flowers. They can help you retrofit your existing greenhouse with light dep and other modern systems at a level that fits your budget. If you're just starting out, Forever Flowering can help you plan and build your new greenhouse so that you get started on the right foot. The cannabis business has enough risks without trying to go it alone with your greenhouse. Contact Forever Flowering Greenhouses to partner with folks who have an indisputable reputation as knowledgeable and easy to work with. Go to shapingfire.com/FFG to find out more. Welcome back. You are listening to Shaping Fire. I'm your host, Shango Los, and our guest this week is Shane Young, founder of Natural Enemies Biocontrol. So during the first set of the show, we talked about the approach to beneficial insects and what they are and why they can be a great teammate for defending your garden. So now that we've kind of given everybody an idea of what beneficial insects are about, let's talk about thinking through the story problem of introducing beneficial insects to a garden. When you go and you meet with a new client, I'm sure that you walk them through a first couple steps so you can figure out whether or not the garden is an appropriate target for beneficial insects, and to kind of think through what the transition will even look like. Will you walk all of us through that so that people can consider it for their own gardens?
Sure. And, most gardens are a proponent or can be used with beneficial insects. A lot of it has to do with people's pest issues. And as we spoke about, there's specific species that go after certain pests. But, it seems like companies that culture culture beneficial insects, they've been around for 30 plus years. It isn't anything new. Again, it's a matter of education on showing a customer what can be used. And it's not just what that we run into, but we also pride ourselves on giving people the why. You know what I mean? I don't want people to come to us and be like, tell me what to do. Give them something to do, and they don't take any, steps on their own to make sure it's working right. But we want to provide them what to do. We want to provide them why to do it, and then we leave a lot of work on them as well, because it's not like what you said earlier. It's not like you set it and forget about it. Sprays isn't that way either. There's a lot of monitoring that goes into it. So, when we walk into a facility, it's obviously introductions, it's pest concerns, it's where do we start and what do we do? And my biggest thing with people is, or with companies, is obviously, we want to start with your mother plants. We want to start with your veg. We don't want to start at the very end where you're having spider mite problems at 7 weeks into flower, and what do I do at this point? I kind of leave them on their own for that to figure out. But we can be helpful as well. It depends on what state they're in and what they can and can't use, basically. So walking into a facility, it's again just gathering information. It's fact finding to see what their production is like, see what their protocol is, see what they've been doing in the past, and why they're coming to us to really formulate a plan to be helpful to these people. And when I talk about what sprays they've used in the past, there's some chemicals that can be used that will actually deter predatory mites from even coming in and helping. So it's upfront information. It's when to use it, how to use it properly, and where to begin. I generally try to talk people into, regardless of how big a company is, you obviously want to jump in right away and take care of all their rooms, that they have problems with or are interested in. But we actually try to start with people in their mother rooms, and if they're sharing that with a veg as well, because if you start out clean and your plant is healthy and you push that into flower, chances are there shouldn't be too many issues going into the last flowering stages there. You need to have somebody that is, again, interested in doing this. You want somebody to take responsibility. You want people to scout and monitor and tell us what they're seeing so that, we can make our comments on what they're seeing and why that is, basically. It's not always the what, it's always the why, why they're seeing this, basically. It's being informational to people.
Right on. It's interesting because what you're describing is a balance, right? It's you want to continually course correct as you go so that you can keep this balance where the plants are healthy and the beneficial insects are able to do their job and just keep the population of the pests as low as possible. I'm assuming that it never goes to zero. It's about keeping them in control.
No, you touched on it, and we have different types of customers, and we have customers who want zero tolerance. And where I came from, zero tolerance was not feasible, but I kind of disagree with that. If you pay enough and you use enough species and predators a specific amount of time, you're not going to have any issues. We have a lot of companies that, rather than using the scouting and monitoring technique, they would rather pay more up front with us. to have the specific program in place where they don't have to worry about it. And that concerns me because regardless of how much you put in, there could always be something else that may come up. If you're using a species that's specific for thrips, maybe you're getting spider mites or vice versa. So it's real difficult. I'm sorry, it's not difficult. People just have different ways of approaching pest management. But when you do have a small pest population, that's what I tell people. I'm smiling right now, Shango. It's like it's called pest management for a reason. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's monitoring populations of good versus the bad, and do I need to make a decision? And what product do I use? Is it slow release sachet or is it active adults? To help clean up my area quickly. So again, that's where we come in to be helpful with people.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. And I've heard people poo-poo beneficial insects about how they're not 100%. And my thought is, the people that I know who spray enough to feel like they're at 100%, they're putting themselves at risk with other plant problems because they're spraying so much, especially if they're spraying oils and they're moving towards bloom. You use this example that I found very interesting. You said, you want to start with the mothers so you get them early because you don't want to end up in week 7 of bloom with spider mites. And so what if you do find yourself at week 7 with spider mites? Can beneficial insects be used for an acute hot problem now in bloom, like at the end, or is it too late at that point for beneficial insects to have helped, and you really have to start early in your cycle?
So one thing to comment on is when you say people poo-poo, beneficial insects, that's why I got into it, is because my spray program wasn't as effective as I thought it was. You know what I mean? So there's two sides of the story. Obviously, you can spray and still have problems. You can use beneficial insects and still have problems with it. I just want to comment on that off the bat. That's what transitioned to me on beneficial use, is because the spray program I had put in place, actually, I was like, God, I just sprayed a couple days ago and I still have mites over here. I'm like, it doesn't make sense. So what's a better way of dealing with things? What's more effective? What's healthy, to the safety? What's healthy and safe, for employees that you have is looking for something else. And again, it goes back to education on that. Fast forward to your next question on, what if you do find yourself in bloom in week 7 and you're cropping out in 8 weeks? It's difficult. I'll be forward with you. It's difficult to take care of a problem at that stage with beneficial insects because you have a very limited pool of what you can pull to use that for. A lot of the times, the predatory mites they find it very difficult to crawl across, the flower and the trichomes. If you can imagine a tiny little insect trying to climb across, hairy plants, and then you add the stickiness of the flower into it. It's an unfriendly environment, number one. So that comes before it gets to that stage. That's where the monitoring and scouting comes in on, if we have any issues, let's take care of it before it really gets into this stage at that point. There's a couple products that we do use that I call our flyers versus predatory mites that are roaming around the canopy of your plant. That can be helpful. And again, all honesty, Shango, I tell people, I'm like, you can use this. Obviously, there's no guarantees going into it, and it's going to cost you a lot of money, to clean up a situation quickly, because you need to understand that there's also a life cycle of pests that you have. And when you introduce a beneficial insect or a predatory bug, I guess you would say, it's not like they sit there and eat all day long until your pests are gone. They have a resting phase similar as we do. They need to rest, then they need to reproduce and be able to eat again. It is difficult at that stage. Yes, it can be done. I tell people, physical removal might be your best bet. Rather than buying product from me, why don't you use one of your company employees? You can use a low-powered vacuum cleaner. You can physically remove them with, paper cloth towels that are wet, basically. And then people laugh at me. They're like, do you know how many plants that we have problems with? And I said, well, this could have been prevented, basically, with different techniques heading up to this. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So it sounds like, if you have an acute problem right before you harvest, you can throw money and beneficials at it and labor and do your best for it. But really, you may want to just start with your mother plants and understand that the cycle that you're in right now may not be as successful as you want, but start on the next cycle and be forward looking. You said something something else that I found really interesting. One of the reasons why some people push against beneficials is because the trichomes are so sticky and they're so effective at gumming up and grabbing insects that people say to me, why would I want to add more insects to my garden? Because then my final product is going to have more dead, captured insects in the trichomes. So when people ask you about that, what do you say?
I try not to laugh, number one. Well, no, man, and again, I hate to keep preaching the same words, but education becomes first. You know what I mean? That's it. A lot of the times, like I said, it's an unfriendly environment for them where we've watched these things because the natural searching of a predatory mite in general, if it's on your plant or canopy, is to go upwards, basically. And I recall being in Portland here one time, and a guy called me. He's like, hey, man, what we're doing is not working. And I wanted to make sure that we were doing it at the right stage. And this is when I started out 4 years ago in cannabis. And I remember walking over to his place and literally releasing a species called Persimmilus, for two-spot spider mite, and instantly I basically just watched it climb up the stem, and it gets to the flower and it turns right back down, and then it climbs right back up and goes down, up and down, up and down, up and down, and basically it's going to die of exhaustion a lot quicker. So when people are concerned about species or predatory mites getting stuck in their flower, for the most part, they don't go there, I guess you would say, because it's difficult for them and it's really hard for them to thrive and even move anywhere in that stage. If I can recall in the last 4 years doing this, of pictures of people sending predatory mites, like pictures of their flower to me, and they're like, hey man, this is stuck in it, and what is it, number one, because they were new customers of mine, and I'm like, God, that looks like a predatory mite, and I've literally seen that picture one time, I guess you'd say, in 4 years, where it's stuck on a flower. The only other time it wasn't a predatory mite, it was actually a minute pirate bug, and it's called Aureus, and the Aureus was stuck directly in the flower. My customer pulled the Aureus out, and there was a spider mite in there that it was going after. Basically, it got kind of stuck in like a hole, basically going after it in the flower. And I mean, other than that, I haven't received any responses from people that what you gave me is not working out because it's ending up in our flower. It's ending up in our buds. That happens. That
makes sense. It kind of just suggests it's a growing myth, right? That yeah, we've all seen bugs, usually flying bugs, in the trichomes, but you're saying, yeah, that's not the bugs that we're adding. So just because you've seen bugs caught in your trichomes doesn't mean that these are the same beneficial insects that you're going to use to defend your garden. Would that be a good way to say it?
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. I mean, things that you see that are flying, the first thing that comes to mind is fungus gnats. When people have an outbreak of fungus gnats, that's one of the bigger problems. Rather than them spreading disease through the rooting system, the adults that you have are more of a nuisance in traditional ag, but in cannabis, they get stuck to the flower. So it's like, it becomes a real pain in the ass for people to deal with and work around at that stage. So, a lot of the times what we offer to people as product as well, we show them pictures of them, images. This is what it is, because we don't want them to call us 2 weeks down the road and be like, God, I got this other pest, basically, and they'll send us pictures. We're like, no, these guys are on your side. This is what we talked about 2 weeks ago.
These are your teammates.
Here's
Stop killing them.
Of it. Yeah, be nice to those guys. So again, we're trying to formulate as a company, be as helpful as possible to people, give them not as many options as possible, really limited options on what we've seen to be most effective in certain situations. That was one of the most difficult things for me when I started out biocontrol, is I felt like I learned a lot on my own, but I had to go through so many resources, a lot of people, a lot of time in order to formulate what I thought was best for a situation. Something could be different based off experience, that you run into or other people. So, again, our company's focused on being helpful to people, offering them education on what to do. And what I tell them, I'm like, this is what we found to be most effective. You can get information from somebody else and it may be different. And that's great. If it's helpful and effective to you, that's awesome. We appreciate it. You know what I mean? But we just kind of speak from experiences, grower feedback and personal experiences through here.
Yeah, right on. That's one hell of a sales cycle. You play this role of evangelist, and these are more than customers. You're actually getting into partnership with these people, because it has to evolve over months, and there's a lot of education back and forth. Yeah, I totally get that. So let's get down to some more nitty gritty. So once a grower has decided that they want to make the transition from spraying to using beneficial insects, break it down for me what that looks like. Is it as simple as, day one comes and the spraying is done, and that's the same day you release the beneficials, or is there a a clean up the plants period where the old pesticides have to volatilize and go away before you can add the beneficials?
So what we start to do with people is, keeping or speaking about what's already been spoken for is, sanitation, plant health. We talk about those things, but what we also talk about, and that's changed, I feel, in cannabis. And again, this is my thoughts on what's happening and when I came from traditional agriculture, my rates for beneficial insects were based off per acre, whether it was 10, 20, or 30,000 predatory mites per acre. This is the species I would use. This is for the reason on how they're going to help you, basically. When I started recommending in cannabis, it became difficult because that wasn't working very well for me, and I had to make changes at that point. Again, number one is not starting with your flower plant. It's starting from the very beginning. What that does, it eliminates a lot of cost with people. It gives them a chance to work with things slowly and see it as it walks through from, mother plants to their cuttings to veg before it gets into flower. It gives you 3 or 4 weeks to kind of have that education and balance and information on, what to use and how to use it. When you talk about pesticide use, it's difficult to nail down like specific, do this 1, 2, 3 basically. But what we do with people is we ask them again, what's your procedures been like in the past? What's your pest concerns basically? What's your pest level at this point? And if they can't answer some of these reasons, you can only give them a broad answer, I guess you'd say.
Does the whole grow have to be sprayed down and clean? Because I'm assuming that, if they're spraying there'll be residual pesticides on surfaces, and those would injure the newly introduced beneficial insects, right?
I wouldn't encourage people to spray everything down to clean things up. I personally think that has been used differently by each company you work with, each person that you may work with at this stage. I prefer to have there be a pest level of some stage so that there's a food source for the predatory mites to start working against, depending on what your pest is, rather than spraying something down to clean it up. I mean, yes, you can approach it that way as well, but then you need to wait X amount of days depending on the product that you use, because there are residuals that are left over. But again, what's nice is seeing what states are allowing cultivators to use at this stage, because a lot of it is oil-based, which dissipates quickly, which doesn't leave a whole lot of residues. What I used to do about 8 years ago, starting to use it, is I ran trials on what I sprayed, and then spraying my plants with water just for hydration. You know what I mean? Yeah. That helps wash residuals off. So maybe you can, take that from 7 days down to 5 days where we can apply the beneficial insects. Specific products is kind of what it's all about, Shango, because there are things that you can spray a day before and then release beneficial insects, the next day or 2 days later. It may not be an insecticide per se, maybe a bioinsecticide, which are like a lot of active funguses that people can use that do not leave residuals, that don't have any, re-entry hours after you spray them, or it's limited to like 4 hours. So it really depends on what they've been doing prior, and kind of where their focus is on where they want to go. And if they really want to try this thing, if they really want to walk the walk, then, we ask very specific questions before we start working with somebody. The most difficult thing is when people call in and say, hey, can you send me some predatory mites? I'm like, yeah, we can. Help me out here. So what happened about 3 years ago is we started creating what I call a new customer inquiry, which people can fill out online. And that basically gives us 90% of the information that we need to be helpful with you and to show you how to walk from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. If you're using Avid or Orthene or using something like this, residuals may be longer than if you're, hey man, I just use Botanigard on my product, which is an active fungus. We could probably start the very next day or 2 days later. You know what I mean? So the new customer inquiry really gives us information needed to be helpful to people on when they can start, what they can use, and kind of what to expect moving forward in a program.
Yeah, right on. And as we've gone on, I know that it pains you to go back again and again to the idea of the education aspect, and that's how primary that is. But the more you talk, the more I get it, that each grow really is its own environment, and the what they're spraying is a variable, and there's just so many variables that is not one solution fits for everybody, and so really it's about getting getting in and participating with them to figure out what their program is going to be, and then doing the transition. So I want to talk more about the transition, and especially about application rates. But we need to take our second break, so we're going to take that break and be right back. You're listening to Shaping Fire, and my guest today is Shane Young, founder of Natural Enemies Biocontrol. As cannabis normalization sweeps the country, knowledge of how to grow cannabis naturally and without synthetic inputs has become more and more available. In fact, probiotic growers are experiencing large yields and exceptional terpene profiles without using chemicals banned in their state. Move away from the risks inherent to chemical nutrients and instead invest in your soil. Use your soil again and again, reducing costs and improving the vitality of your soil with each cycle. Keep It Simple Organics has been a leader in aerated compost teas for years and now provide premium soils and nutrients to the cannabis industry. They offer a full line of all natural inputs for building your soil, feeding microbe communities, and brewing nutrient and compost teas. They can even help you test your soil to spot deficiencies that may be holding you back. Check out their website at kisorganics.com. Enter the word Shango into the form at checkout to receive 10% off your first order. Stop pouring bottled nutrients on your soil only to throw it out each cycle. Start building living soil that will serve you for years to come. Visit kisorganics.com and grow healthy, thriving cannabis. Now that the health benefits of terpenes have become well known in the cannabis industry, people everywhere are looking for the purest terpenes without adulterants. The problem with most terpene providers is that they're not sourced naturally and instead are made as a byproduct of refining petroleum, and that's so sketchy. The terpenes sold by True Terpenes are entirely different. They are certified organic, non-GMO, and food grade. That means they are extracted from real plant sources. There are no solvents of any kind used during the extraction process. They are distilled only with steam. That's right, only steam. In fact, terpenes from True Terpenes are so pure that you can eat them. Not only that, but you can stack them with better results too. What I mean is, other companies' terpenes have got a few percent of impurities, and when you stack those terpenes to make a blend, you're adding a variety of impurities that degrade your final product. True Terpenes also has strain-specific terpenes for a wide range of cannabis strains like Durban Poison, Sunset Sherbet, and Granddaddy Purple. True Terpenes has robust and supportive customer service, so your questions will get answered fast and efficiently. If you've shopped for terps before, you know how rare that is. So whether you want to cup your hands to smell some beta-caryophyllene to calm down after getting too high, or if you want to dab some alpha-pinene so your lungs feel fabulous and your mind feels liberated, True Terpenes will provide you with a truly natural experience. If you are a cannabis product developer, these are the terps you want to add to your oil or edible or capsule or whatever. True Terpenes are simply the best your money can buy. Don't try and make a premium product with substandard terps. Choose True Terpenes for a top shelf experience. Go to shapingfire.com/True Terpenes to find out more, or click on the link in this week's newsletter. Welcome back. You are listening to Shaping Fire. I'm your host, Shango Los, and our guest this week is Shane Young, founder of Natural Enemies Biocontrol. So in this last section, I want to talk about what it's actually like to do the application process. How do you go about applying the beneficial insects to the plants?
It's a great question, because the problem that people or growers have been seeing is that, information on the packaging, on the liter containers or whatever you're using for application, some of them say, spread these all over your flower. And that's, that's not what you want to do in cannabis at this stage, because you're going to be spending a lot of time trying to clean that up if you can eventually clean it all up, basically. So that's very difficult for people to do it. So again, it comes with, an initial conversation, possibly people reaching out on how do I apply this. But for the most part, we try to write it out for people. We try to make things simple on, obviously the label is going to say this. I'm sorry to say, you're not going to follow that. You can't do that. That's not the way of doing it. So it's difficult. It could come up in conversation. It can come up by email, whatever it may be.
Can you give an example? Can you get real specific there, Shane? What kind of application example would you see on the labels that you would educate somebody through? Like, I try to make sure that the listeners have got, real actionable results. So give us an example of why cannabis is different from the other crops that their beneficial insect may be labeled for.
Sure. No, just what I touched on. Again, one of the labels says to spread the product over your flower. And it could be, my first thought right now is that's specifically for a thrips predator, whether you're using Swirsky or Cucumaris of species for it, because they want to say to spread it across the flower because that's generally where the thrips are going to congregate, basically. So one thing that you could do is, I feel that it's an old method of control, but still an effective method, is you can use it to apply to the base or the stalk of your plant, basically. You can create piles towards the stem where they'll crawl up into your plant that way. A secondary way that you can do it is what we call in the office, we call them hanging baskets. And what's funny is I used to try to figure out a more effective way of application for product as well a long time ago. So I actually used to buy like Dixie cups or Solo cups, and I would poke holes in them and use like not wire hangers, but like ornament hangers to hang out on my plants, and I would dump product into these cups, and then I would hang them on the plant because the active adults are going to crawl up the plant, or up the cup into your plant, basically. And then just years ago, biocontrol companies started creating what they call hanging baskets, where they are already pre-made for you to do an application for. So what's difficult is when somebody's like, "Yeah, I followed the directions, and this is what happened." Sometimes you can't give that information out, on the application. So we actually try to provide like an application sheet for specific species when we work with people as well, so that when they're choosing to do something, again, we want them to be effective, so we want to give them the most information to be effective, which is how to do the application at that stage. So that's really what comes to mind on my side when you ask that.
Does the choice between using, say, for example, a hanging basket or a sachet, do those different application techniques depend on the type of beneficial that you're adding, or the size of the garden, or just simply the preference of the grower?
It actually touches on a lot of different things. Preference of the grower, yes. There's a couple different ways of doing an application. There's one thing called the slow release sachet, which is an actual breeding bag, is what I call it, that slowly release predatory mites into the canopy of your plant. And what I stress to people is these are truly used as a preventative maintenance, you know what I mean? Because if you have a problem, you want to use active adults. If you have a problem, if you have a pest issue, you don't want to use slow release sachets on that plant. Yes, it will be helpful in the long run, so you can do the sachets and the adults in the same application, basically. That gives you more immediate control, and then it gives you long-lasting control with the sachet that you've already applied to it. Different species are available in different forms of application. For the most part, they come in slow release sachets. They come in active adults, which I call the bulk liter containers, or 5-liter bags can be used for commercial growers that use more product. There's flyers that can just be released that fly, that can kind of encompass your growing space on their own, where you don't have to apply them to every single plant or every third plant by any means. So it just depends on the predator that you use.
I know that a lot of the breeders of these beneficial insects, they sell them with application rates that were devised for ornamental plants, and cannabis is a very unique lady. What have you seen as far as any difference in application rates for cannabis versus boring industry standard plants?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's I don't say unfortunate that I can't change my information online, because I get that information direct from the suppliers who actually culture the product. You know what I mean? But when you touch on it, when I started recommending in cannabis agricultural rates, I would calculate out by square footage. You know what I mean? Is kind of what I used to do per acre, basically. Calculate out in square footage what can be used, and I just remember selling my first liter of soil mites for fungus gnat control, and God, the guy had, I don't know how many plants in his 1,000 square foot room, and I'm like, yeah, 1 liter of soil mites per 1,000 square feet, that's the rate I've used for the last 8 years. It'll knock the shit out of your fungus gnats. And again, 2 weeks later, he's like, no, it's not working. And that's when I got into, well, why isn't it working? You know what I mean? And the amount of water that's being applied to the plant, because not just for the hell of it, it's because it demands it so much. It grows like a weed. It needs that water, and basically for growth at that stage. So just starting from that small arena of more soil mites more often. We had to get some in every single pot. So I ran trials for, I don't know if it was 4 months or so, offering product, splitting product with people who were interested in using it on kind of formulated a plan for them moving forward on how to be effective using this product. And is it going to be cost effective on our end? But when you talk about cost effectiveness, you take out labor of spraying, you take out the health of the plant, basically, you take out any chance of getting knocked for a pesticide test, all these different things. So I guess looking over it and talking to the guys in the office here that we deal with, there's very few growers that we have that use traditional ag rates and are very effective with it. It's very few and far between. So for the most part, you can times the rates by 5 just to give you a generalization. But it also depends on what you're doing on the back end. You made the comment about hit it, or apply it and leave it, earlier on in the conversation. And, you can't do that with anything. You can't do that if you have a spray program, because you still need to monitor. There still may be a pest issue or a pest presence at that stage where if you don't take care of it right away, it's going to, quickly become larger and larger as you move on. So, I hope that kind of helps answer the question that you were looking for.
Yeah, it does. So do you find that based on bioregions, for example, where the plants are being grown in the U.S., that you either need to choose different beneficial insects or the application rate changes? Because I assume that if you're doing applications, in the cold Northwest, it's going to be a lot different in the hella hot Arizona.
Yeah, no, great question. And a lot of it has to do with, one, choosing the correct species for the pests that you're after. Number two, it does have to do with the heat and also the humidity of a region where you're at. A lot of the times, lower humidities are going to dry out the eggs of the predatory mites, which causes problems or which delays reproduction, basically. It takes longer to do that. So, I've been approached by a lot of people who, they're running 10, 15% humidity throughout the summer. And my comment is, no, these are not documented to do that. We may need to do, again, applications more often to be effective. We may switch it up rather than using these sachets, which are probably going to release slowly in your crop and not a little bit more quickly at a place that has 50% humidity or 60, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is fairly ideal for reproduction. And I just go into, again, all honesty, I'm like, hey, man, this was 3 years ago. I had a guy that's like, hey, your sachet has lasted five weeks. We had 12% humidity for 3 months. I'm like, I don't understand how that was possible. But showing them how to open the packages up, looking to see if there's reproduction, finding them on their plants and what they're doing, I'm like, good. So it's nice to be able to push the boundaries of what they're documented to do specifically and tell people it's not documented for it. Generally, we don't recommend to do it, but this is what I would probably choose in your specific area. It's built a little bit better for the lower humidities. It's able to reproduce a little bit quicker than another species that we have, and we kind of go from there. And that's where the feedback comes in, Shango. That's where we can't just give somebody a program, they walk away and use it and never hear from them again, because there's always feedback that we can use from everybody that we can help other growers with on. If this didn't work, well, we had another guy that did this, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it was very successful for them. But a lot of it has to do with, again, from the very beginning is, sanitation, plant health, monitoring, scouting, being able to know what pests are what. So pest identification is key, that we're using the correct species from the very beginning or we're not going to be very successful. So.
Right on, I get that. Can beneficial insects be used in outdoor crops?
Yeah, we use it many times. Yeah, all last year. All last year. Indoors is great. Outdoors, yes, for sure. There's no problems using it.
Do the beneficial insects walk away from the cannabis plants? I mean, I always figured that at least with an indoor program, they were penned, they were captured inside of the greenhouse or the building or whatever. But if you go outdoors, they could just walk away.
Yeah, so it depends on what you're using, obviously. There's flyers that make me nervous on if you release them, they're just going to fly away. But you can also create attractant plants to keep them near, basically. That gives them an additional food source if they don't find it on the plants that you have. As you talk about them walking away, it becomes like an application technique as well. If you're applying them directly onto your plant, there's so much canopy space that these guys need to move. You know how small they are. In order to walk around a plant, it's going to take them quite a while to do so. For the most part, they're not going to crawl down your stem and out into the dirt and go somewhere else. In our experience, they generally stay on your plant. They're looking for food. They're predators. Versus the pests that you guys have, they're, a lot of the times they're slow because all they're doing is sitting there feeding on your plant. You know what I mean? Versus what we offer people, they're looking for food. Generally, they're going to be a little bit faster, basically, and they need to find food in order to maintain.
Right on. Do you have to use higher application rates outdoors?
Yeah, again, it's a general question, but depends on the region that you're in. It depends on the humidity that you are. But again, it depends on plant counts as well and what the sizes of your canopy are. We find it, a 6x6 plant's treated differently than a 1x1 plant. There's a lot more canopy space that needs to be covered. So yes, I would say so.
Yeah. One of the things that I find interesting is that, these beneficial insects and how they do what they do, it's not new. It is something that the horticulture industry has been using for decades. And what you are bringing to the table is being the first person in the industry to start transitioning and learning the ins and the outs of applying what's been used in horticulture for decades to specifically what's going on in cannabis. So as a corollary to that, I have this question. Are there any new beneficial insects that you see coming online in the future? Is there the new one, the new model, or does that not really happen much in the beneficial insect scene where you've got your set of specific and generalized beneficials and all of the novelness and innovation is happening on application and education?
No, it's a good question. And for the most part, as far as I know, and it could be false, but I don't think it is, a lot of the things that are cultured and supplied in the United States, they have to be native to our specific area in order for us to offer them to other people. So I think pretty much what is here now is what's going to be around for a while. There are companies that offer different species or additional species to do different things, basically, and each company has their own, they have their own choices of what they want to culture on their own. But when you start working with us, again, I think, like I said in our previous conversation, is that we try to take a lot of that information out for people and just give you what we feel is the most effective, and which limits, to keep it simple, I guess you'd say, with a lot of people, is we try to simplify our responses towards people. But I think what it is it needs to be native in order for it to be sold and supplied here in the United States.
Yeah, right on. So, right here before we wrap up, I want to give you, a platform to talk specifically to the commercial, master growers who are listening and are interested in moving away from the synthetics or the sprays in any way and move over, but they still have got concerns about, how much risk there will be during the transition. And also, would they, decrease in yields? So, why don't you just address that on our way out here? What do you say to the commercial grower who wants to go in this direction, but they need it put in the right terms for them?
It's a great question. And I think, throughout our conversation today, I've touched on a lot of points for people to feel a little bit more comfortable using this. You touched on about even how beneficial insects have been cultured for decades. You know what I mean? When I started using them 10 years ago, I remember going to a class and there was 3 people in the class. And then the next year there was 10, and then there was 50, and then there was 100, then there was only standing room. As the years go on and people become educated on what you can use them for, I think that's really going to steer a lot of people in the right direction. A lot of the pesticide testing is going to steer people to use beneficial insects first. And if they need to use chemicals by any means, they in order to make them a little bit more comfortable, they might reach for that as well. But I think what you're going to see is higher flower content on the back end. You're not going to be spraying your plants with anything, which is going to cause no stress, which allows them to grow to their natural capacity. I mean, that's what I saw when I ran trials 10 years ago, is 30% growth increase on plants that I just used beneficial insects for, aphids, spider mites, fungus gnats, versus a traditional program of horticultural oils that I use on a different plant, basically 30% increase. It's amazing to see, and once you see, you start believing, and then you start seeking more information on, God, how can I do this even better? We get a lot of reports from a lot of different people telling us about how healthy their plants are these days and how much more flower they're receiving. And it's not everybody. but there are people that have really taken the time to do that and to seek the information to be effective for it. And I don't want to push anybody to do it if they don't want to. Again, our website says choose beneficial insects. If you're interested, we're more than happy to help and to give you the specific information that you need and to help you, from day one moving forward. Because obviously, we want to work with you 5 years down the road. We don't want to just talk with you one day, give you product, it doesn't work, and you be done with it. Even if somebody doesn't order product for a while, we still call and follow up to see how things are going. What happened? What can we do different? You know what I mean? So it can be time consuming for some people to try to learn how to do this. But if you have somebody at your company that's willing to grasp this and really go into it and seek information and do it, then that's going to be your best bet at this stage.
Right on. Well, Shane, thank you so much for being an educator about this. The show, the Shaping Fire show, we are very clearly, probiotic, living soil, working with nature, and not down with synthetic inputs. And we don't take, synthetic input advertising money. And so it's very refreshing for me to talk about a topic where we can get garden pests under control by working with nature instead of trying to dominate nature.
I agree, and I appreciate you reaching out, Shango. It's nice talking with you.
Right on. Thanks for being on the show, Shane. I really appreciate your time.
Okay, take care, man. See ya.
If you'd like to find out more about Shane Young, beneficial insects, and natural enemies, you can visit their website at naturalenemiesbiocontrol.com. So Natural Enemies really only serves the commercial industry, but their website is still a fantastic place to get educated at naturalenemiesbiocontrol.com. And if you'd like to hear more from Shane Young, you can check out my YouTube channel at /Shango Los to check out Shane Young speaking on Vashon Island. You can find more episodes of the Shaping Fire podcast and subscribe to the show at shapingfire.com and on Apple iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. If you enjoyed the show, we'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a positive review of the podcast wherever you download. Your review will help others find the show so they can enjoy it too. On the Shaping Fire website, you can also subscribe to the weekly newsletter for insights into the latest cannabis news and product reviews. On the Shaping Fire website, you will also find transcripts of today's podcast as well. For information on me and where I will be speaking, you can check out shangolos.com. Does your company want to reach our national audience of cannabis enthusiasts? Email hotspot@shapingfire.com to find out how. Thanks for listening to Shaping Fire. I've been your host, Shango Los.